December 7, 1943, Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. As Lieutenant Commander Robert Ellison surveyed the devastation across the recently captured beachhead, the twisted metal and shattered concrete of Japanese bunkers littered the landscape like broken toys. Yet there they stood, 5 curved, corrugated Quonset huts, merely dented but structurally intact, despite having endured the full fury of both American naval bombardment and desperate Japanese counterattacks. "These things shouldn't be standing," he muttered to his aide. "Not after what we threw at them." Little did he know that thousands of miles away in Davisville, Rhode Island, a civilian engineer named Peter de Jong had anticipated this very scenario, incorporating a design element so subtle yet effective that it would save countless lives throughout the Pacific campaign. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how an overlooked modification to America's humble, prefabricated buildings would transform them from simple shelters into nearly indestructible sanctuaries, changing how the military approached battlefield construction forever. The bitter January wind cut through Peter de Jong's wool overcoat as he stepped from his car at the Davisville Naval Construction Battalion Center. The facility, sprawling across the Rhode Island countryside, hummed with the sounds of industrial activity that had replaced the peaceful rural landscape just months earlier. Though only 34 years old, De Jong carried himself with the serious demeanor of a man twice his age. His wire-rimmed glasses, slipping occasionally down his nose, gave him the appearance of an academic rather than an industrial engineer. "Morning, Mr. De Jong," called out Captain Raymond Pierce, the commanding officer of the newly formed Naval Construction Battalion Center. "Cold enough for you?" "Good morning, Captain. Nothing compared to where these buildings might end up, I imagine," De Jong replied, gesturing toward the massive production facility where the first batch of Quonset huts was being assembled. Captain Pierce nodded grimly. "The Pacific Theater is demanding immediate deployable structures. Command wants 5,000 units ready to ship within 3 months. De Jong's eyes widened. 3 months? That's impossible, Pierce finished. Not according to the Admiral. The British already have their Nissen huts. We need our own version, and we need it better, faster, and more adaptable to tropical conditions." As they walked toward the main production facility, the enormity of the task ahead weighed heavily on De Jong's shoulders. The U.S. military needed structures that could be quickly assembled in any climate, from the freezing Aleutian Islands to the sweltering South Pacific. The war effort wouldn't wait for perfect solutions. Inside the cavernous building, prototypes of the semi-cylindrical structures stood in various stages of completion. Teams of engineers and workers moved about with purpose, many of them recently recruited from civilian construction companies. These Quonset huts, named after the location of the Naval Construction Battalion Center in Quonset Point, represented America's answer to the British Nissen hut of World War I, but with significant improvements for rapid deployment and tropical conditions. Chief Petty Officer Walter Sorensen, a burly man with calloused hands and 20 years of construction experience, approached them with blueprints tucked under his arm. "The latest revisions, sir," Sorensen said, handing the plans to De Jong. "Production models are using 16-gauge steel for the ribs and corrugated galvanized steel for the shell, as specified." De Jong studied the plans carefully. "These are rated for wind loads up to 100 miles per hour and snow loads of 40 pounds per square foot. Standard dimensions, 20 feet by 48 feet with a 10-foot radius. Yes, sir. Assembly time is down to 8 hours with a team of 10 men." Captain Pierce nodded approvingly. "That's good progress." But something troubled De Jong as he examined the structural details. "The Pacific Theater will present challenges we haven't fully accounted for. Japanese artillery isn't in these calculations." "They're shelters, Mr. De Jong, not bunkers," Captain Pierce reminded him. Their purpose is to house personnel and supplies quickly, not withstand direct bombardment. I understand that, Captain, but in forward areas these huts will inevitably be exposed to blast effects, if not direct hits. We should consider some modifications. Chief Sorensen raised an eyebrow. Any changes will impact production schedules. We're already working round the clock. De Jong walked around one of the completed prototypes, running his hand along the corrugated steel. What if we could make a simple change that wouldn't significantly affect production time, but could dramatically improve blast resistance? I'm listening, Pierce said, his interest piqued. It's about how energy is transferred through the structure, De Jong explained. The current design distributes force evenly along the arched frame, which works well for wind and snow loads. But explosive blast waves are different. They create momentary overpressure that can collapse a structure instantly. He pointed to the foundation connections. If we modify this joint here, where the arch meets the foundation, we could create a controlled failure point that would actually protect the overall structure. Captain Pierce looked skeptical. A deliberate weak point? That sounds counterintuitive. Not weak, sir. Flexible, De Jong corrected. Think of it as a circuit breaker. When overpressure hits, these modified joints would allow limited movement, breathing room essentially, absorbing the initial shock before the structure resettles. It's a principle of dynamic response rather than rigid resistance. Chief Sorensen scratched his head. So, instead of fighting the blast, we dance with it a little. De Jong smiled. Exactly. The enemy has the punch, but we control how we take it. What would this modification entail, practically speaking? Pierce asked. A simple damping collar at each foundation point. We could fabricate them from the same materials we're already using, with minimal additional labor. They would allow controlled radial expansion under pressure, then guide the structure back to its original position as the blast wave passes. Pierce considered the proposal. How confident are you in this theory, Mr. De Jong? Confident enough that I'd stake my reputation on it, De Jong replied without hesitation. I've been studying blast effects since my time at MIT. This principle has been proven in other applications. After a moment's thought, Captain Pierce nodded. Draft up the specific modifications. I'll give you 3 days to present a prototype. If it doesn't significantly impact our production timeline, we'll implement it. Thank you, sir. You won't regret this. As De Jong walked away to begin work immediately, he had no idea that his simple modification would soon be put to the test in ways he couldn't imagine. 6,000 miles away, Lieutenant James Harrington of the 111th Naval Construction Battalion, the famed Seabees, wiped sweat from his brow as he supervised the assembly of Quonset huts at a forward supply base on Guadalcanal. The humid jungle air clung to his skin like a wet blanket, and the constant drone of insects competed with the metallic clangs of construction. Chief Willis, are those foundation plates installed according to the new specifications? Harrington called out to his chief petty officer. Yes, sir, Willis replied, pointing to the unusual collars where the metal ribs met the concrete foundations. Though I still don't understand why we're using these fancy connection points when the standard ones would be simpler. Orders from Davisville, Harrington explained. Some engineer back home thinks these will help the huts withstand blast pressure better. Willis snorted skeptically. If we take a direct hit from Japanese artillery, no fancy collar is going to save this tin can. Maybe not, Harrington conceded, but every bit of protection helps out here. The Seabees had arrived on Guadalcanal in the wake of bitter fighting that had secured the island, but left the landscape scarred with shell craters and bullet-riddled palm trees. Their mission was to rapidly establish infrastructure for the next phase of the Pacific campaign. Quonset huts formed the backbone of this effort, serving as everything from mess halls to medical stations, supply depots to communication centers. By sunset, 6 complete huts stood in neat rows, their curved metal surfaces reflecting the orange glow of the tropical dusk. Lieutenant Harrington allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he surveyed the day's progress. Each 20 by 48-foot structure represented another small victory in the massive logistical effort supporting the island-hopping campaign. "Not bad for a day's work," remarked Hospital Corpsman Second Class Michael Rodriguez, who had stopped to observe the new medical station taking shape. "Sure beats the tents we've been using." "How are things at the field hospital?" Harrington asked. Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Busy. We lost 2 men to infection this morning. This climate is brutal on wounds. Having a proper medical station with actual walls and a floor will make a huge difference. We'll have it ready for equipment installation tomorrow," Harrington promised. As they spoke, a messenger approached at a jog. "Lieutenant Harrington, message from command, sir." Harrington took the folded paper and read it quickly, his expression growing serious. "Intelligence reports Japanese naval activity nearby. Possible air raid tonight. All personnel to take appropriate precautions." "Should we evacuate the construction area?" Willis asked, joining them. Harrington considered the options. "No time to move all the equipment. Post lookouts and prepare shelters. If we hear the alarm, everyone into the ravine on the north side." As darkness fell completely, the base transformed into a state of tense readiness. Gun emplacements were manned, blackout procedures implemented, and personnel restricted to essential movement only. Harrington found himself walking the perimeter of the new Quonset hut installation, unable to rest. At 0217 hours, the air raid sirens wailed to life. Moments later, the distinctive drone of Japanese aircraft engines could be heard approaching from the north. "All personnel, take cover!" Harrington shouted as men scrambled for protection. He found himself alongside Chief Willis and several others in a recently dug foxhole near the new Quonset huts. The night erupted with the thunderous barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Tracer rounds streaked upward, illuminating the undersides of Japanese bombers as they approached in formation. Then came the ominous whistle of falling bombs. The first explosion struck the jungle to the north, sending shockwaves through the ground beneath them. The next series walked closer, and Harrington instinctively pressed himself deeper into the earth as a tremendous blast erupted less than 50 yards away. "Direct hit on Hut 3, someone shouted over the din. Harrington raised his head just enough to see a horrifying sight. A 500-pound bomb had detonated just beside one of the newly constructed Quonset huts. The expected scene of complete destruction, however, did not materialize. Though the hut nearest the explosion was severely damaged, it had not disintegrated as Harrington had expected. More surprisingly, the adjacent structures, though visibly distorted, remained standing. The raid continued for another 20 minutes, an eternity of noise and fear, before the Japanese aircraft departed. As the all-clear sounded, Harrington emerged cautiously from the foxhole to assess the damage. "I'll be damned," Chief Willis whispered as they approached the hut nearest the bomb crater. The structure was definitely damaged. One end was caved in, and the entire frame had visibly shifted on its foundation. But remarkably, the majority of the semicircular structure remained intact. "Those fancy connection points," Willis said, pointing to the foundation. "Look at them." Harrington knelt to examine the special collars where the steel ribs met the concrete. They had clearly moved, allowing the entire structure to flex rather than shatter under the blast pressure. As he had been told, they had indeed danced with the punch. "Get me a damage assessment of all structures," he ordered, "and find out if anyone was inside any of these huts during the attack." The report came back within the hour. 3 men had been inside Hut 6, the medical supply storage, when a bomb had detonated approximately 40 yards away. All 3 had survived with only minor injuries. protected by a structure that should, by all conventional wisdom, have collapsed around them. "The storage inside is a mess," reported Petty Officer Simmons. "Everything got tossed around, but the building itself held together. It's still usable after we straighten out some of the ribs." As dawn broke over Guadalcanal, Harrington drafted a detailed report to be sent back to Davisville. Whatever engineer had designed those special connection points had just saved American lives. At the Davisville production facility, Peter de Jong sat at his drafting table, surrounded by calculations and material specifications. The production of Quonset huts had reached full capacity, with over 200 complete units shipping out daily to theaters across the globe. His blast-resistant foundation connections, initially viewed with skepticism, had become standard on all models following successful testing. Captain Pierce entered the engineering office, a telegram in hand. "De Jong, you might want to see this, just came in from Guadalcanal." De Jong took the message and read it carefully, his expression shifting from concentration to astonishment. "Japanese air raid. Direct hit with 500-pound bombs. Structures remained standing. Minimal casualties," he read aloud. "They're crediting the modified foundation connections with saving lives." "Your circuit breakers worked," Pierce said with a rare smile. "Command is requesting detailed analysis and recommendations for potential further improvements." De Jong sat back in his chair, momentarily overwhelmed. What had begun as a theoretical improvement was now proving its worth in combat conditions. "There's more," Pierce continued. "They want you on the next transport to Pearl Harbor. DISINCPAC headquarters is establishing a special engineering unit to improve field structures throughout the Pacific. They want you to lead it." "Me? In the Pacific?" De Jong had assumed his contribution to the war effort would remain firmly anchored in Rhode Island. "I'm not military, Captain. You'll go as a civilian consultant with the rank equivalent of lieutenant commander. Technical expertise is what they need, not military training." Pierce placed a folder on De Jong's desk. "Your travel orders. You leave in 3 days." The enormity of this development left De Jong speechless. His simple modification, born from theoretical principles of blast dynamics, was now deemed valuable enough to warrant his presence in the active theater of operations. "One more thing," Pierce added before leaving. "Whatever you did with those connection points, keep it classified. If the Japanese figure out how to target the structural weak points, the advantage disappears." De Jong nodded solemnly. "Understood, sir." 3 weeks later, Peter de Jong found himself stepping off a transport plane at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, the very location where his design had first proven its worth in combat. The scene was unlike anything in his experience. Military activity everywhere, the distant sound of artillery fire, the tropical heat pressing down like a physical weight. Lieutenant Harrington was waiting to meet him, easily identified by the CB insignia on his uniform. "Mr. de Jong, welcome to Guadalcanal," Harrington greeted him. "I'm the one who sent the report about your huts." "Lieutenant Harrington," de Jong acknowledged, shaking his hand. "I'm eager to see the actual structures that survived the bombing." "Right this way. We've preserved the most damaged one exactly as it stood after the attack. The others have been repaired and are back in service." As they drove through the base in a dusty jeep, de Jong was struck by the omnipresence of his creation. Quonset huts lined both sides of the makeshift roads, serving every conceivable function from barracks to bakeries. "There it is," Harrington said, as they pulled up beside a damaged Quonset hut cordoned off with rope. "Direct hit approximately 30 feet from this end. The bomb craters still visible." De Jong approached the structure with professional curiosity that quickly transformed into astonishment. The damage pattern confirmed his theories perfectly. The foundation connections had allowed the entire structure to flex laterally under the blast pressure, then partially return to position. The semicircular design had distributed the remaining force around the arch, rather than concentrating it at vulnerable points. "May I?" he asked, indicating his desire to examine the foundation connections more closely. "Of course. That's why you're here." Kneeling in the Guadalcanal dirt, de Jong inspected the specialized collars that connected the steel ribs to the concrete base. They had performed exactly as designed, allowing controlled movement during the blast and preventing catastrophic structural failure. "Incredible," he murmured. The theoretical models were accurate, but seeing it in practice. "Those connections saved lives, Mr. de Jong," Harrington said simply. "The men inside this hut walked away with nothing worse than bruises and ringing ears." Over the next hour, de Jong examined every aspect of the damaged structure, taking measurements and photographs, making detailed notes. What he found both confirmed his original theories and suggested several potential improvements. That evening, at a meeting with base commanders, de Jong presented his preliminary findings and recommendations. "The current design exceeded expectations in blast resistance," he explained to the assembled officers. "But with some additional modifications, we could improve performance even further without significantly increasing production complexity." Captain Stanley Reed, commander of the base, leaned forward with interest. "What kind of modifications are you proposing, Mr. de Jong?" "There's 3 specific improvements," de Jong replied, sketching quickly on a pad. "First, a revised foundation collar with improved damping characteristics. Second, reinforced end walls. These proved to be the most vulnerable points. And third, an improved anchoring system for interior equipment and fixtures." "How quickly could these changes be implemented?" asked Major Williams of the Marine Corps, who had lost valuable communications equipment when the interior of a Quonset hut was violently rearranged during an attack. "The foundation and anchoring modifications could be implemented immediately using materials already available here," de Jong replied. "The reinforced end walls would require changes to production templates back at Davisville, but could be incorporated within weeks." Commander Reed nodded approvingly. "Make it happen, gentlemen. Mr. de Jong, you'll have whatever resources you need." Over the following days, de Jong worked closely with CB construction teams, implementing his improved designs on existing structures and documenting the process for wider application. The practical experience of the CBs proved invaluable, suggesting numerous small refinements to make the modifications more field expedient. Chief Willis, initially skeptical of de Jong's fancy connections, had become one of his strongest advocates after witnessing their effectiveness firsthand. "The boys are calling them de Jong's dancers now," Willis informed him, as they supervised the installation of improved foundation collars on a row of supply huts. "On account of how they let the buildings dance with the blast, instead of fighting it." De Jong smiled at the nickname. "As long as they're installing them correctly, they can call them whatever they want." "Oh, they're installing them right, sir. Nobody wants to be in a hut without your dancers when the bombs start falling." The true test of the improved designs came just 3 days later, when Japanese aircraft executed another raid on the base. De Jong, along with dozens of other personnel, took shelter in a Quonset hut that had been fully modified according to his latest specifications. The structure had been designated as an emergency shelter, specifically because of its enhanced protection. As the familiar drone of enemy aircraft approached and anti-aircraft guns opened fire, de Jong found himself experiencing the threat his designs were meant to counter. The theoretical had suddenly become intensely personal. "Everyone stay low and away from the ends of the building," ordered the Marine sergeant in charge of the shelter. "Hug the sides if you can." The first bombs fell distant. Their explosions felt more than heard. Then came a deafening blast that seemed to pick up the entire structure and shake it like a child's toy. De Jong instinctively covered his head as dust and small items rained down from shelving units. But the structure held. The improved foundation collars allowed the controlled flex he had designed, while the reinforced end walls prevented the progressive collapse that had damaged structures in previous attacks. When the all-clear finally sounded, the occupants emerged to find a bomb crater less than 40 feet from their shelter, and a building that remained fully functional. Word of the Quonset hut's remarkable resilience spread quickly throughout the Pacific Theater. Within months, De Jong's modified designs became standard for all forward installations. What had begun as a theoretical improvement implemented by a civilian engineer in Rhode Island had evolved into a critical protective measure, saving lives across the combat zone. On a humid afternoon 6 months later, De Jong stood on the deck of a transport ship approaching a newly established base on Peleliu. The familiar silhouettes of dozens of Quonset huts dotted the landscape, their semicircular forms a testament to American industrial efficiency. Each one now incorporated his blast-resistant features as standard. Commander Reed had joined him on this inspection tour of forward bases. "Those huts have changed how we approach forward deployment," Reed remarked. "Commanders are positioning critical functions, communications, medical, intelligence in Quonset huts specifically because of their proven resilience." "They were never designed to be bunkers," De Jong replied. "They're still vulnerable to direct hits." "Of course, but the psychological impact has been significant. Men work better, rest better, and fight better when they know they have reasonably secure facilities to return to." As they disembarked and toured the Peleliu installation, De Jong was introduced to Colonel Marcus Hensley of the 1st Marine Division, who had specifically requested to meet him. "Mr. De Jong," Hensley greeted him warmly, "your dancing huts saved my command post during the initial Japanese counterattack. Took 3 near misses from 250-pound bombs. Communications gear kept functioning, wounded kept being treated, and orders kept being issued. Made all the difference in holding the beachhead." "I'm glad they performed as designed, Colonel," De Jong replied modestly. "As designed?" Hensley laughed. "Son, I've been fighting since Guadalcanal. Nothing ever performs as designed in combat, except, apparently, your huts." The tour continued to other islands, each stop reinforcing the impact of De Jong's innovation. On Guam, a medical officer credited the reinforced Quonset hut hospital with saving dozens of lives during an artillery barrage. On Saipan, a communications team had maintained critical contact with naval support vessels throughout an enemy attack, coordinating from the relative safety of their modified structure. Perhaps most revealing was a captured Japanese intelligence document translated by Naval Intelligence, which Lieutenant Commander Jackson shared with De Jong during a stop at Pearl Harbor. "They're calling them indestructible American shelters," Jackson explained, showing De Jong the translation. "There's a standing order to concentrate artillery fire on other targets because of the inefficient use of ammunition against our Quonset hut installations." De Jong read the document with a mixture of pride and humility. "The Japanese have it wrong. They're not indestructible. They just understand how to absorb punishment." "A lesson some generals could stand to learn," Jackson remarked dryly. By early 1945, over 150 Zero-and Quonset huts had been deployed throughout the Pacific Theater, with De Jong's blast-resistant modifications incorporated into every unit. The humble, prefabricated structures had become iconic symbols of American presence, their semicircular silhouettes instantly recognizable from New Guinea to the Mariana Islands. In a small ceremony at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz personally presented De Jong with the Navy Distinguished Civilian Service Award, the highest honor that could be bestowed upon a civilian serving with the Navy. Mr. de Jong's ingenious modification to standard Quonset hut designs has saved countless American lives throughout the Pacific Campaign, read the citation. His willingness to enter active combat zones to perfect his designs demonstrates extraordinary dedication to the war effort and to the protection of American service personnel. After the ceremony, Admiral Nimitz spoke with de Jong privately. "You know what impressed me most about your work, Mr. de Jong, not the engineering brilliance, though that's certainly present. It's that you understood something fundamental about warfare that many military minds miss." "Sir?" de Jong inquired, unsure of the Admiral's meaning. "You recognize that sometimes strength comes from yielding rather than resisting. Your buildings dance with the explosion rather than standing rigid against it. There's a profound lesson there." Nimitz smiled thoughtfully. "The Japanese believe that the immovable object is strongest. You prove that sometimes controlled flexibility creates true resilience." As de Jong prepared to return to the United States in August 1945, he took one final tour of a marine installation on Okinawa. The base, like so many others, was dominated by the curved forms of Quonset huts, each one incorporating his specialized connections that had come to be known throughout the Pacific as de Jong's dancers. Chief Petty Officer Marcos Diaz, a veteran Seabee who had constructed hundreds of the modified huts, guided him through the base. "Hard to believe such a simple change made such a difference," Diaz remarked. "Just that little bit of give at the foundation." "The principle was always there in nature," de Jong replied. "Palm trees bend in hurricanes while oaks break. Buildings shouldn't always be rigid monuments to permanence. Sometimes they need to breathe with the forces acting upon them." As they walked, they passed a Quonset hut that had been converted into a makeshift memorial. Inside, on a simple wooden plaque, were carved the names of service members who had been sheltered by Quonset huts during attacks and survived because of it. "The men started this on Guadalcanal," Diaz explained. "Every time a hut took a near hit and everyone walked away, they added names to the list. It followed us island to island. There are over 300 names now." De Jong stood silently before the memorial, unexpectedly moved. His work as an engineer had always been about solving technical problems, applying principles of physics and material science to practical challenges. Rarely had he been confronted so directly with the human impact of his solutions. Each name represented a life extended, a telegram not sent to anxious parents or a young wife, children who would grow up with fathers rather than gold stars in windows. All because a foundation connection had been designed to move rather than stand rigid. After the war, Peter de Jong returned to civilian engineering, his contribution to the war effort largely unrecognized outside military circles. The specific details of his blast-resistant modifications remained classified for decades, though the basic Quonset hut design became an iconic part of American architectural history. The lessons learned from his work, however, influenced structural engineering far beyond military applications. The principles of dynamic response to blast effects that he pioneered became fundamental to the design of structures in earthquake zones, tornado-prone regions, and later, buildings designed to withstand terrorist attacks. In 1994, at the age of 85, de Jong was invited to the dedication of a restored Quonset hut at the Naval Construction Battalion Museum in Port Hueneme, California. The structure, complete with his original dancer connections, had been preserved as a testament to American engineering ingenuity during World War II. As he ran his weathered hand along the foundation collar that he had designed half a century earlier, a young Navy lieutenant approached him. "Mr. de Jong, my grandfather served in the Seabees in the Pacific. He was in a communications hut on Peleliu when it took a near hit from Japanese artillery. He always said it was the dancing foundation that saved his life. The lieutenant extended his hand. "I wouldn't be here if not for your work." De Jong shook the young man's hand, understanding in that moment the true legacy of his wartime innovation. Not the technical achievement, not the awards or recognition, but the simple fact that generations existed because of a small change to a humble building design. The semicircular, corrugated Quonset huts had long since been replaced by more advanced military structures. But the principle De Jong had discovered, that resilience comes not from rigid resistance, but from controlled flexibility, continued to influence protection systems throughout the world. Sometimes, as Admiral Nimitz had observed, the greatest strength comes from knowing when to yield. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.